She was standing in my mother's kitchen, holding a cup of coffee, smiling at me, and I had just found out 30 minutes ago that she had taken everything. Every single dollar my mother left behind, gone, and she was smiling. I want you to think about the last time someone you loved looked you in the eye and lied. Not a small lie, not an "I'll pay you back later" lie. A calculated lie, a planned lie, a lie that took months to build while you were grieving. That's where this story begins, and I promise you by the end you will not see it coming. My mother's name was Ruth Aliner Simmons. She was 68 years old, small woman, barely 5'2". But she had this presence when she walked into a room people noticed. Not because she was loud, because she was certain. She knew exactly who she was. She had worked as a seamstress for 40 years, every stitch deliberate. Every seam straight. She was like that about everything. She raised 2 daughters in a row house in Philadelphia. No help, no safety net, just her hands and her discipline and her absolute refusal to let us go without. My sister's name is Carol. Carol is 4 years older than me. She was always the confident one, the one who knew what she wanted and went and got it. Growing up, I admired that about her. I thought that's what strength looks like. I was wrong about what I was seeing. That wasn't strength, that was appetite. My mother was diagnosed with early-stage dementia when she was 64. It came slowly at first. Small things. She'd forget a word mid-sentence. She'd lose her keys. She'd repeat a story she'd told 10 minutes ago and not realize it. Then it wasn't small anymore. By 66, she needed help with daily tasks. By 67, she didn't always know what year it was. Carol stepped in. She moved back to Philadelphia. She became Mom's primary caretaker. She took her to appointments, managed her medications, handled the phone calls. I was living in Atlanta. I visited every 6 weeks. I called 3 times a week. I sent money every month to help with expenses. I thought we were doing this together. I thought we were a team. My mother passed on a Thursday morning in March. I got the call from Carol at 7 a.m. I was on a flight by 9. I don't remember packing. I don't remember the airport. I just remember sitting in the middle seat on that plane between 2 strangers, shaking, and not being able to cry yet because the grief was too large to fit through my eyes. My mother was gone, and I thought, at least I have Carol. At least we have each other. That thought did not survive the week. The will reading was 5 days after the funeral. My mother had a simple estate. The row house in Philadelphia paid off, worth about $280,000. A savings account with $47,000, some jewelry, some furniture. The will, which an attorney had drawn up 7 years earlier, was clear. Everything split equally. 50-50, between me and Carol. That was my mother's wish. Her voice from beyond, equal fair, both my girls. The attorney read the will. And then he paused. He looked up from the papers. He said, "There is also a matter of a deed transfer that occurred 14 months ago." I looked at Carol. She was looking at the table. "A deed transfer," the attorney explained. 14 months before my mother died, when my mother's dementia was significantly advanced, Carol had taken her to a different attorney, not the family attorney, a different one, across town. And she had my mother sign over the deed to the Philadelphia row house. To Carol, alone, not 50-50, not to both daughters, to Carol, entirely, solely. The house worth $280,000 was already in Carol's name. Had been for over a year, while I was sending money every month, while I was flying in every 6 weeks, while I was calling 3 times a week, while I was being a sister. I looked at her. She finally looked up. And she said, and I will never forget this as long as I live, she said, "Mom wanted me to have it. I was the one who was here." I did not scream. I did not cry. I went very, very still. There is a kind of anger that doesn't make noise. That sits in your chest like a stone. That makes everything around you go sharp and clear. I felt that anger, and then I felt something else underneath it, something cold and focused. I thought, I need to make a phone call. I have a friend named David Ockaffer. We went to college together. He became an elder law attorney. He specializes specifically in cases involving dementia, estate fraud, and the financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. I had called David years ago when my mother was first diagnosed just to ask general questions. He had told me then, "If anything ever feels wrong, call me immediately." I called him from the parking lot of the attorney's office. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "David, something's wrong." he said. Tell me everything. David asked me a series of questions I wasn't expecting. What was the date of the deed transfer? What was my mother's documented cognitive state at that time? Who were her doctors? Was there a formal diagnosis on record? Was the transfer done with independent legal counsel, meaning, did my mother have her own attorney advising her separately from Carol? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew where to get them. David explained the legal framework. When a person with dementia signs a legal document, the validity of that document depends on whether they had legal capacity at the time of signing. Capacity isn't a simple yes or no, it exists on a spectrum. But in cases of advanced dementia, when a person cannot understand the nature or consequences of what they are signing, any document they execute can be challenged. There's also a legal concept called financial elder abuse. In most states, using a position of trust, caregiver, family member, power of attorney, to direct assets from a vulnerable adult to yourself is not just civil fraud. It is a crime. Carol had been my mother's caretaker. My mother had dementia. Carol had taken my mother to an unfamiliar attorney without informing me and had my mother sign over a house worth $280,000. David said, "This is a strong case, but we need to move quickly." What followed was 3 months of work I would not wish on anyone. We subpoenaed my mother's medical records from the 14 months prior to the deed transfer. Her neurologist's notes were detailed. At the time of the transfer, my mother had been assessed at a moderate to severe stage of dementia. She had scored a 14 out of 30 on the standard cognitive assessment. Anything below 17 is considered significant impairment. We tracked down the attorney Carol had used for the transfer. He was a general practice lawyer with no elder law background. He had no record of conducting a capacity evaluation. He had not spoken to my mother's doctors. He had not asked for any medical documentation. He had simply taken 2 women into his office, one of whom he was told was the property owner, and processed the paperwork. We got statements from 2 of my mother's neighbors, women who had known her for years, who described her state during that period. One of them said my mother had knocked on her door 3 times in 1 week asking where she was. She didn't know she was standing on her own street. And 14 months before she died, Carol had taken her to sign away her house. I want to stop here for a moment, because this story is about law and deeds and court filings. But underneath all of that, underneath every document and deposition, it's about something much simpler. It's about a woman named Ruth, who sewed for 40 years so her daughters wouldn't go without, who split everything equally in her will because fairness was who she was, who, in the final years of her life, lost the ability to protect herself. And the person she trusted most, the person sleeping in her house, making her meals, managing her medications, used that trust. Used her confusion. Used the very vulnerability that came from loving and being loved to take what wasn't hers. Pause, let that breathe if you have an aging parent right now. If someone in your family has taken on the caretaker role. I am not saying don't trust them. I am saying stay involved. Check in, ask questions, make sure you see documents, make sure your parent has independent legal counsel for any major decisions. Because the most dangerous frauds in family estates are not committed by strangers. They are committed by the person with the house key. We filed suit to invalidate the deed transfer on 2 grounds: lack of capacity and undue influence. Carol hired an attorney. She countered that my mother had been lucid that day, that she had wanted Carol to have the house, that I was the absent daughter, the one who had moved away, and that Carol had sacrificed years of her life to care for Mom. That last part was true. Carol had sacrificed. She had given up things to be there, and that sacrifice was real and it mattered, but sacrifice is not the same as entitlement. Caring for someone does not give you the right to take their assets while their mind is failing. The neurologist testified. The medical records were entered into evidence. The neighbor statements were read into the record. And then something unexpected happened. The attorney Carol had used for the transfer, facing questions about his own professional conduct, provided a statement to the court. He said he had not conducted any capacity evaluation. He said Carol had told him my mother was a little forgetful but totally fine. He said he had taken her word for it. The court invalidated the deed transfer. The house was returned to my mother's estate, which meant 50-50. As my mother had intended, as she had always intended. Carol and I were required to sell the property. The proceeds were split. We have not spoken since. I don't know if we ever will. I've thought about Carol a lot in the years since. About what drove her to do what she did. I think she felt unseen. I think years of caregiving, real, hard, exhausting caregiving, built up a kind of resentment, a belief that she was owed something, that the sacrifice should be rewarded in a way the will didn't reflect. I understand that feeling even if I can't excuse the action. But here's what she didn't understand. My mother saw both of us equally. That's what the will said. That's what Ruth, stitching every seam straight, tried to tell us from the other side. Equal, both my girls. Carol took the house, but she couldn't take that. Here is what I need you to hear before I go. If you have a parent with dementia or any diminished cognitive capacity, there are specific protections you need to put in place right now, not later. Now, first, make sure a trusted elder law attorney is involved in any major asset decisions. Not a general practice attorney, someone who specializes in this. Second, if one sibling is the primary caretaker, establish regular financial transparency, bank statements, receipts. Not because you don't trust them, but because transparency protects everyone, including the caretaker. Third, understand what a power of attorney actually means and doesn't mean. POA authorizes someone to act on a parent's behalf. It does not authorize them to transfer assets to themselves. Fourth, if something feels wrong, a document you weren't told about, a transaction you didn't know happened, do not wait. Call an elder law attorney immediately. Time matters in these cases. And finally, stay involved, even from a distance, even when it's inconvenient, even when the other sibling seems to have everything handled. The moment you step back completely is the moment you lose your ability to protect the person you love. My mother trusted both of us. I intend to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that trust. The row house on the Philadelphia street was sold to a young couple. I heard they painted the front door red. My mother would have loved that. She always said that house deserved more color. I like to think she knows. If this story made you think of someone, a parent, a sibling, a situation you've been quietly worrying about, don't let it sit. Make the call, have the conversation. Do the one thing you've been putting off. Because the people we love deserve to be protected, even when they can no longer protect themselves. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.